My brother's voice didn't just fill the ballroom of the Plaza, it lacerated it. It was a sharp, jagged edge cutting through the hum of polite conversation and the expensive scent of Chanel No. 5. "Everyone, look here!" Marcus shouted, his hand gripping a crystal flute of vintage Krug like a scepter. "I want you to meet the black sheep of the Thorne family, my sister, Elena, or as I like to call her, our very own manual laborer." 200 pairs of eyes, belonging to the most powerful venture capitalists and socialites in Manhattan, pivoted toward me. The rhythmic clinking of silver against china died a sudden, suffocating death. I stood there, frozen in the center of the gilded hall, feeling the weight of their judgment. I wasn't wearing a 5-figure gown. I was wearing high-end dark denim and a cream silk blouse I'd bought specifically to look approachable. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, a crimson tide of humiliation, as a ripple of snickering erupted from the back of the room. Marcus leaned in, his smile wide and predatory, smelling of aged scotch and unearned confidence. "She spends her days digging ditches and playing in the mud, while the rest of us are busy navigating the global markets. Elena here is worried about whether the petunias have enough water, but hey, someone's got to do the dirty work, right?" And there it was, the punchline to my life, delivered by the man I used to share my toys with. But the worst part wasn't Marcus. It was my mother, Eleanor. She stood just behind him, her posture regal, her face a mask of cold elegance. She didn't gasp, she didn't defend me. Instead, she offered that tiny, tight-lipped nod, the one she reserved for when things were finally in their proper place. It was the ultimate betrayal, a silent agreement that I was indeed the family's greatest failure. Welcome to my world. My name is Elena Thorne. I am 34 years old, and to my family, I am a ghost in work boots. They see a woman who gardens for a living. They see dirt under my fingernails and assume my mind is as empty as my bank account. Here is what they don't see. I am the founder and CEO of Thorne & Terra, the premier landscape architecture firm on the East Coast. I oversee 47 architects and engineers across 3 states. Last year, my firm cleared $15 million in revenue. This year, we secured a $6 million contract for the Hudson Riverfront Revitalization Project. My work has graced the covers of Architectural Digest 3 times, and I hold 2 national awards for sustainable urban design. But to the Thorns, if you aren't moving numbers on a digital screen, you aren't working. If you don't wear a bespoke suit to breakfast, you aren't successful. I never told them, not out of modesty, but out of a desperate, perhaps naive hope. I wanted to see if they could love me without a price tag attached. I wanted to know if I had any value to them beyond my net worth. Tonight, in this ballroom, under the crystal chandeliers of the hotel I'd actually helped renovate, I got my answer. Marcus is 38, 4 years my senior, and a lifetime more arrogant. He's a senior partner in a boutique private equity firm, a title that, in our house, is treated like a divine appointment. Since he was 22, my mother has treated his every breath like a miracle. Every Thanksgiving dinner is a lecture on Marcus's portfolio. Every Christmas is a showcase of Marcus's new Porsche or his beach house in the Hamptons. And me? I'm the one who does that little lawn thing. "It's not gardening, Mother," I've told her 1,000 times. I am a licensed landscape architect. I design ecosystems, I manage multi-million-dollar construction budgets, and I run a heavy machinery fleet that costs more than Marcus's penthouse. She would just pat my hand with a look of profound boredom. "That's nice, dear, but wouldn't you be happier in an office, somewhere clean?" I stopped fighting years ago. I thought silence was my shield. I thought if I just worked hard enough, the truth would eventually speak for itself. When Marcus called me 3 weeks ago to invite me to his merger celebration, I should have known it was a trap.
He doesn't invite me to things. I'm the embarrassing secret he keeps hidden from his serious friends. Listen, Elena, he said over the phone, his tone clipped and impatient. This is a massive night for me. There will be high net worth individuals everywhere. So do me a favor, don't talk about the shovel business. I don't need my partners thinking my sister is the help. Try to look presentable. I should have hung up. I should have told him to go to hell. But despite everything, I still remembered the brother who used to help me with my math homework. I remembered the boy who protected me from bullies in middle school. That boy was buried under layers of greed and ego, but I kept looking for him. So I showed up. I spent 3 days agonizing over an outfit that wouldn't embarrass him, yet wouldn't look like I was trying too hard. I chose a silk blouse the color of expensive cream and a pair of heels that felt like a penance. Walking into the Plaza, I actually felt a spark of pride. My firm, Thorne and Terra, had designed the rooftop garden and the outdoor terrace of this very hotel 18 months ago. There's a bronze plaque near the fountain that bears my company's name. My brother had walked past it a dozen times tonight without ever truly seeing it. I tried to blend into the shadows, sipping a glass of water, watching my mother fawn over Marcus like he was a returning conqueror. I saw the way he moved through the crowd, the predatory glint in his eye, the way he checked his watch every 5 minutes with a flicker of genuine panic. Something was off. I've spent a decade reading people across negotiation tables. I know when a man is confident, and I know when a man is performing. Marcus wasn't celebrating, he was selling. He was desperate. I was contemplating an early exit when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see a face from a nightmare I thought I'd outgrown. Caleb Vance, my ex-boyfriend from 8 years ago, the man who dumped me because I lacked ambition and was content with a mediocre life of mowing grass. "Elena?" he said, his voice a smooth, practiced drawl. He looked me up and down with an air of smug superiority. "Wow, you look exactly the same. Still doing the landscaping thing?" "It's architecture, Caleb, and yes, I'm still doing it." Right, he chuckled, adjusting his silk tie. He'd had a hair transplant since last I saw him. It looked like a small, nervous animal had died on his forehead. "Well, Marcus, told me you were struggling. If you ever want a real job, maybe something in my firm's marketing department, let me know. I hate to see you wasting your life in the dirt." I didn't even have time to respond before the clinking of the glass began. Marcus dragged me toward the center of the room. He put his arm around me in a way that felt more like a hostage situation than a sibling embrace. "My Stinky sister," he announced to the laughing crowd. "No real job, no future, just a manual laborer." The room erupted. My mother smiled. Caleb snorted champagne. And in that moment, the last flickering ember of love I had for my brother went cold. I looked around the room, the marble, the gold leaf, the designer labels, and I realized they weren't the lions they pretended to be. They were sheep, and my brother was a wolf who had run out of prey. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I simply stood there, an architect in a room full of people who didn't realize I was the one who had built the very ground they were standing on. But as I looked across the room, I saw one man who wasn't laughing. He was standing in the corner, a tall, silver-haired figure in a charcoal suit that cost more than Marcus's car. He was watching my brother with the calculating gaze of a hawk. Our eyes met. He didn't smirk. He didn't look away. Instead, he raised his glass to me in a silent, respectful toast. I didn't know who he was yet, but I was about to find out that my brother's big night was the beginning of his end.
I didn't run from the ballroom. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I walked out of the plaza with my head held high, the rhythm of my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. As I passed through the grand lobby, I stopped for a fleeting second by the tiered fountain. Near the base, half hidden by a lush arrangement of ferns, was a small bronze plaque. It read, cura et designata per Thorne and Terra, cared for and designed by Thorne and Terra. My brother had stood 10 feet from that plaque for 3 hours, bragging about his importance, never realizing he was standing in my shadow. I stepped out into the cool Manhattan night. The air was sharp, smelling of rain and asphalt. I didn't hail a yellow cab. I walked 3 blocks to a discreet underground parking garage where my vehicle was waiting. It wasn't a flashy Italian supercar or a delicate convertible. It was a custom blacked-out Range Rover autobiography, a beast of a machine built for both construction sites and 5-star galas. I climbed inside, the smell of premium leather and old blueprints grounding me. I sat in the silence for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Manual laborer, I whispered to the empty car. Stinky sister. I tapped the screen on my dashboard. A secure app opened, requiring a biometric scan. My thumbprint granted access to the internal server of Thorne and Terra. I looked at the dashboard. Active projects, 14. Projected annual revenue, $15.4 million. Current cash on hand, $4.2 million. My weekly payroll alone was $68,000. I provided healthcare, 401k matching, and a living wage for 47 families. I had built this from a single used pickup truck and a set of hand-drawn sketches I'd made in the basement of a rented apartment, while Marcus was out blowing his first Wall Street bonus on bottle service. I drove toward my office, a converted industrial loft in Chelsea. It was my sanctuary. While Marcus lived in a world of digital numbers and imaginary value, I lived in a world of steel, stone, and soil. When I arrived at the loft, the lights were dim, the vast space filled with architectural models and rolls of vellum. On the central mahogany table sat the model for the Hudson Riverfront revitalization. It was a $6 million masterpiece of urban engineering, sustainable marshes, flood-resistant plazas, and a floating botanical garden. It was the project that would define the New York skyline for the next 50 years. I stood over the model, tracing the lines of the pathways. People ask me why I never told them, why I let my mother believe I was struggling, why I let Marcus treat me like the help. The answer is simple. I wanted to know who they were when they thought no one was watching. Money is a bright light. It blinds people to the truth of character. If I had walked into Thanksgiving dinner 4 years ago and announced I was a millionaire, Marcus wouldn't have loved me more. He would have just tried to use me sooner. My mother wouldn't have respected me. She would have just bragged about me to her bridge club. I wanted to find out if the Thorne family had a heart that wasn't tied to a bank balance. Spoiler alert, they didn't. I sat at my desk and pulled up the guest list for tonight's gala and began searching for the name of the man who had toasted me at the corner, the one who hadn't laughed. Arthur Sterling. The name hit me like a physical blow. Arthur Sterling wasn't just some retired banker. He was a legend. He was the man who built the modern financial infrastructure of the city. He was the ghost of Wall Street. If Arthur Sterling was at Marcus's merger party, it wasn't because he was a friend. Sterling didn't have friends, he had investments. I remembered the look in Marcus's eyes tonight, that flicker of raw, unadulterated panic. I opened a private browser and began digging into my brother's firm, Thorne Capital Management. On the surface, it looked pristine. High returns, prestigious clients, a glossy website filled with pictures of Marcus looking visionary. But I know how to look beneath the surface. I know that if the foundation is cracked, the skyscraper will eventually lean. I spent 4 hours digging through public filings, offshore entity registrations, and industry rumors. I'm an architect. I'm trained to see the structural integrity of a deal, and Marcus's deal was a disaster. His merger wasn't a sign of growth, it was a desperate attempt to hide a hole in his balance sheet the size of the Grand Canyon. He had been aggressive, too aggressive. He had over-leveraged his clients' funds into high-risk crypto assets and failing tech startups. Then I found the most disturbing piece of the puzzle.
There were 3 private accounts tied to Marcus's firm that were labeled as Family Trust Management. My heart began to race. My father, Harold, had worked for 40 years as a master electrician. He'd retired with a solid pension and a significant nest egg. He wasn't a wealthy man by Manhattan standards, but he was comfortable. Or at least, he was supposed to be. I remembered my mother's voice on the phone last month. "Oh, Susie, your brother is being so helpful. He's taking over the management of your father's accounts so he doesn't have to worry about the bills anymore. It's such a relief to have a professional in the family." I looked at the transaction history I'd managed to bypass. Large sums of money, $50,000 here, $100,000 there, moving from the family trust into Marcus's personal operating account. My brother wasn't just a failure, he was a predator. He was cannibalizing our father's life savings to fuel his delusions of grandeur. I felt a cold, sharp rage settle into my bones. Humiliating me was one thing. Making fun of my little gardening business was annoying, but I could live with it. But stealing from a 72-year-old who trusted him, using our father as a human shield against his own incompetence, that was a line he should never have crossed. I looked out the window at the lights of the city. Marcus thought tonight was the beginning of his new empire. He thought he had successfully buried his embarrassing sister and secured his future. He didn't realize that I didn't just dig holes for plants. I dug foundations, and if I wanted to, I could dig a grave for a reputation so deep that no amount of money could ever pull it out. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. "Jerome, it's Elena Thorne. I need a favor. I need you to look into some financial irregularities for me. And Jerome, I need this kept very, very quiet." Jerome Vance was an old friend from college who now works in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. "Elena," Jerome said, his voice surprised. "It's been a while. What are we looking at?" "A house of cards," I said, watching the rain streak across the glass. "And I think it's time for a little bit of wind." I hung up the phone and looked back at the model of the riverfront. In my world, you never start building until the ground is stable. Marcus had built his entire life on sand. It was time to show him what happens when the tide comes in.
I woke up the morning after the gala at 5 a.m. Habit is a stronger force than heartbreak. Before the sun had even thought about touching the Manhattan skyline, I was in my kitchen, the steam from my black coffee rising to meet the cold, minimalist lines of my penthouse. I looked at my hands. They were clean now, the skin soft from expensive soap, but I could still feel the phantom weight of the soil I'd moved last week at a site in New Jersey. My mother, Eleanor, always said that a lady's hands should tell a story of leisure, not of labor. In the Thorne household, labor was a dirty word. We grew up in a sprawling colonial house in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of place where the lawns are manicured to the millimeter and the neighbors judge you by the vintage of your wine cellar. My father, Harold, was the outlier. He was a master electrician, a man who had built a massive contracting business from the back of a van. He was the one who provided the silk sheets and the private tutors, but he was never refined enough for my mother's social ambitions. Marcus was her project. From the moment he could speak, she whispered into his ear that he was a king, a genius, a titan of industry in waiting. He was the golden child, the one who would take the Thorne name from the world of blue-collar sparks and wires into the stratosphere of high finance. I remember a summer afternoon when I was 12. I had spent 3 weeks in the backyard building a sophisticated irrigation system for my father's vegetable garden using spare PVC pipes and a solar-powered pump I'd rigged myself. I was covered in mud, my hair a bird's nest of twigs, but the water was flowing perfectly. My father was beaming. "Elena, this is incredible. You have a real eye for how things work." Then Marcus walked out. He was 16, wearing a pristine polo shirt, clutching a business magazine. He didn't even look at my project. Instead, he started explaining to our father why he should fire his current foreman and restructure his company's debt.
My mother emerged from the patio, her eyes bypassing me entirely as if I were a piece of lawn furniture. She walked straight to Marcus and smoothed his hair. "Listen to your brother, Harold. He has the mind for the future. Elena, for heaven's sake, go inside and scrub yourself. You look like a street urchin. What will the neighbors think?" That was the blueprint of our lives. Marcus's words were gold, my work was dirt. When it came time for college, Marcus was sent to an Ivy League school on a full ride paid for by my father's sweat. He studied global markets and spent his weekends on yachts. When I told my mother I wanted to study landscape architecture at a state university known for its rigorous engineering and design program, she laughed. "Landscape architecture? You mean you want to be a gardener, Elena? After all we've given you? It's embarrassing." I didn't argue. I didn't beg for the tuition. I took out loans, worked 3 jobs, and spent my summers on construction crews, learning how to operate excavators and read topographic maps. I learned that a landscape isn't just pretty bushes. It's drainage, it's structural integrity, it's the literal foundation of how humans interact with the earth. By the time Marcus was landing his first internship at a prestigious firm, I was starting Thorne and Terra with a beat-up truck and a mission to build spaces that mattered. The irony is that Marcus's success was always subsidized. Every time he made a bad investment in his 20s, my mother would badger my father into writing a check to help the boy get back on his feet. Marcus never learned the value of a dollar because he never had to earn it through the ache of his own muscles. He learned how to manipulate, how to posture, and how to sell a dream that had no substance. And I let them believe I was failing. Every holiday, I'd listen to Marcus talk about his 6-figure bonuses while I sat quietly in my cheap clothes. I'd let my mother give me pity checks for $100 on my birthday, which I would quietly deposit into a scholarship fund I'd set up for young women in trades. I was waiting. I was watching. I wanted to see if they would ever notice the woman I had become, rather than the gardener they had invented in their heads. But last night at the Plaza, the truth became undeniable. They didn't just ignore my success, they needed me to be a failure. Marcus needed a foil to his greatness. My mother needed a disappointment to make her golden boy shine brighter. But as I sat in my kitchen, the anger from the night before began to transform into something much more dangerous: clarity. I pulled out my laptop and opened a hidden folder titled Project Icarus. Inside were months of data I'd been gathering on Marcus's firm. If Marcus had stayed in his lane, if he had just been a jerk, I might have let him keep his delusions. But discovering that he was draining my father's retirement fund, that he was using the man who built our lives as a sacrificial lamb for his failing hedge fund, that was the moment the architect in me decided that this house of cards didn't just need a breeze, it needed a controlled demolition. I saw a notification on my screen, an email from my foreman, Silas, at the Hudson Riverfront site. "Elena, we hit a snag with the foundation of the West Plaza. The soil isn't holding the way the geological reports suggested. It's mostly sand underneath. If we build on this, the whole thing slides into the river in 5 years. We need to pivot." I stared at the word, sand. Marcus Thorne had built his entire identity on the same thing, sand and mirrors. He thought he was a titan, but he was just a man standing on a dissolving shore. I picked up the phone and called Silas. "Secure the site. Don't pour the concrete yet. We're going to reinforce the foundation with steel pilings. It'll cost more, but it will never move. I'm coming down there now." As I hung up, I realized I was talking about more than just a plaza. I was talking about my life. I was done being the stinky sister in the background. I was the one with the steel. I was the one with the blueprint. And Marcus, he was about to find out exactly what happens when you try to build an empire on a father's stolen dreams. I grabbed my keys, threw on my boots, and headed for the door. The gala was over. The real work, the work of retribution, was just beginning.
There is a specific kind of silence that exists on a construction site at 6 a.m. It's the silence of potential, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of heavy engines warming up. For me, that smell, diesel, wet earth, and cold steel, is more intoxicating than the finest perfume at the plaza.
I stood on the edge of the Hudson riverfront site, my boots caked in the very mud Marcus had mocked the night before. I was wearing my high-visibility vest and a hard hat, my eyes fixed on the blueprints laid out on the hood of my truck. "Elena?" I didn't need to turn around to recognize the voice. It was a mixture of cheap confidence and expensive cologne. Caleb Vance, my ex, the man who had once told me that my ambition was cute, but ultimately unmarketable. Beside him stood Isabella, Marcus's wife. She was dressed in a white Chanel suit that had no business being within 10 miles of a construction zone. She held a silk handkerchief to her nose, as if the scent of honest work was a physical assault. "What are you doing here, Elena?" Isabella asked, her voice muffled by the silk. Marcus, told us you'd be playing in the dirt today, but I didn't realize you were actually on the ground. It's a bit pathetic, don't you think?" I didn't look up from my blueprints. "It's a site visit, Isabella, something you wouldn't understand. Why are you here? This is a restricted area." Caleb stepped forward, flashing that bright, artificial smile. "We were heading to a brunch nearby and saw your truck. I wanted to check in. Look, Elena, after last night, I felt bad. Marcus was a bit harsh, even for him. I talked to my partners at Vance Acquisitions. We're willing to offer you a position, entry-level analyst. It'll get you out of this sun and into a real office. You don't have to live like this." I finally looked at him. I saw the hair transplant, the veneers, and the hollow desperation in his eyes. Caleb wasn't offering me a job out of pity. He was offering it because he wanted to feel superior. He wanted to own the woman who had walked away from him 8 years ago. "You want to offer me a job, Caleb?" I asked, my voice calm and razor sharp. "Exactly," he said, puffing out his chest. "We'll even give you a signing bonus, enough to buy a decent dress for the next family event." Isabella giggled, a sharp, grating sound. "And maybe a shower. Honestly, Elena, how can you stand it? The dirt, the noise, the commoners. Marcus says you've always had a peasant streak, but this is a new low." I felt a surge of cold, calculated power. They had no idea where they were standing. They thought they were in a wasteland. They didn't realize they were in my cathedral. "Tell me, Isabella," I said, stepping toward her. My boots left heavy, muddy prints on the pristine white gravel Marcus likely paid for. "How is the new penthouse in Hudson Yards, the one with the private terrace?" She smirked, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "It's magnificent. Not that you'd ever see the inside of it. The view of the river is breathtaking." "I know," I replied softly. "I designed the terrace. I also designed the structural drainage system that keeps your precious infinity pool from collapsing onto the floor below. In fact, if I hadn't spent 3 months playing in the dirt to stabilize the foundation of that building, you'd be living in a very expensive pile of rubble." The smirk flickered, frowned. "What are you talking about? That building was developed by Stone and Mason." "Developed by them, yes," I said, pointing to the massive crane behind me, "but engineered and landscaped by Thorne and Terra, my company, the one Marcus calls a lawn-mowing business." I pulled a heavy leather-bound portfolio from my truck and tossed it on the hood. It fell with a thud that made Isabella jump. I flipped it open to a feature in Architectural Digest. The headline read, "The Thorne Touch: How Elena Thorne is Reimagining the Manhattan Skyline." Caleb leaned in, his face going pale as he scanned the pages. He saw the photos of me standing with the governor. He saw the list of projects, the very buildings he spent his days trying to buy and sell. "This is you?" he stammered. 47 employees, Caleb, 3 states, 15 million in annual revenue, I said, stepping closer until I was inches from his face. "I don't need your entry-level analyst job. I could buy your firm tomorrow and turn it into a parking lot for my excavators."
Isabella's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The Stinky sister had just revealed she was the apex predator in the room. "But here's the thing," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "Marcus knows, or rather he would know if he ever bothered to look at the bronze plaques on the buildings he brags about. He's so blinded by his own ego that he can't see the truth right in front of him. And you are just the vultures picking at the scraps of a man who is currently drowning." Caleb tried to regain his composure. "Marcus is fine. He's about to close the biggest merger of his career." "Is he?" I asked, a predatory smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Because I've seen his books. I've seen where the money is coming from. And I think you'd be very interested to know that your investment in his firm is currently being used to pay off the interest on a loan he took out against our father's house." The silence that followed was heavy. Caleb looked at Isabella. Isabella looked at the mud on her Chanel shoes. "Get off my sight," I said, my voice turning to ice, "before I have my security team escort you out for trespassing. And Caleb, don't ever call me again. I don't associate with lower-tier investors." I watched them scramble back to their car, the white Chanel suit now stained with gray New York grime. They moved with a frantic, panicked energy, the vultures suddenly realizing the lion was awake. As their car sped away, I turned back to my blueprints. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear. The first cracks in the facade had been made. Caleb and Isabella would go back to Marcus. They would ask questions. They would start to doubt. And doubt, in the world of high finance, is the beginning of a death spiral. I looked up at the rising steel of the riverfront project. In my world, you never build a wall until you've tested the strength of the mortar. I had just tested Caleb and Isabella. They were weak. They were brittle. I picked up my radio. "Silas, start the pour on the West Plaza. The foundation is ready." I wasn't just building a park anymore. I was building a cage, and every brick, every stone, every drop of concrete was a part of the plan to ensure that when Marcus Thorne finally fell, there would be no one left to catch him. But as I worked, a shadow fell across my blueprints. I turned to see a man I hadn't expected to see on a construction site. Arthur Sterling. He was standing there, his charcoal suit looking strangely at home amidst the chaos, holding a silver thermos. "I believe we have a lot to talk about, Miss Thorne, and I think you're going to need something stronger than coffee for what I'm about to tell you."
Arthur Sterling stood on the muddy perimeter of the Hudson Riverfront project as if he owned the very air he breathed. In New York, there are men with money, and then there are men with influence. Sterling was the latter, the kind of man who could move markets with a whisper and silence a scandal with a glance. "Mr. Sterling," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow with the back of my glove, "you're a long way from the penthouses of Park Avenue. This isn't exactly a place for a charcoal suit." He looked at the towering cranes and the deep foundation pits I'd excavated. "On the contrary, Miss Thorne, I've always found that the most honest things in this city are built in the mud. Everything else is just glass and mirrors." He offered me the silver thermos. "I didn't come here for the view. I came here because I'm the primary bondholder for the Hudson Revitalization Project, which means, technically, I'm your most demanding client." I paused, the weight of his words sinking in. I knew the project was backed by a massive private equity group, but I hadn't realized Sterling was the architect behind the funding. "Then you know my work," I said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was strong, black, and tasted like it cost more than my first truck. "I've been watching you for 3 years, Elena. I watched you turn a failing park in Newark into a national landmark. I watched you win the Morrison Park restoration against firms 10 times your size. You build with steel and soul. Your brother, on the other hand," he paused, his gaze turning as cold as the river,
He builds with shadows and stolen trust. We walked toward the edge of the pier, away from the roar of the excavators. Sterling pulled a thick, leather-bound folder from his briefcase. It didn't have a label. It didn't need one. Last night at the gala, Marcus thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought I was there to bless his merger, but I was there to conduct an autopsy. Your brother's firm, Thorne Capital, is a hollow shell. He's been smoothing his returns for years, moving money from new investors to pay off old ones. It's a Ponzi scheme in designer shoes. My stomach tightened. I had suspected irregularities, but hearing the word Ponzi from Arthur Sterling made it real. How long? I asked. Long enough that the SEC has been building a case for 8 months. They're waiting for the merger to finalize because it will provide the smoking gun of intent to defraud. But that's not why I'm here. Sterling opened the folder and handed me a document. It was a property lien filing from the Westchester County Clerk's office. Your father's house, I whispered. My hands began to shake. A $200,000 lien? Why? Because Marcus didn't just mismanage his client's money, he ran out of it. 6 months ago, he convinced your father to sign a power of attorney under the guise of simplifying his estate. Then he used that house, the only house his father worked 40 years to own free and clear, as collateral for a high-interest bridge loan to keep his firm's lights on. I felt the air leave my lungs. I saw my father's face, the man who taught me how to read a level, the man who spent his weekends teaching me the names of trees. Marcus hadn't just stolen his money, he had stolen his peace. He had turned our father's legacy into a gambling chip. There's more, Sterling continued, showing me another sheet. The life insurance policy. Your mother thinks it's tucked away for her future. Marcus cashed it out 90 days ago. He's left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a mountain of debt they don't even know exists. The rage that surged through me wasn't hot, it was sub-zero. It was the kind of cold that turns a person into an instrument of precision. I looked out at the river, at the churning water, and I realized that my brother wasn't just a jerk, he was a criminal who was cannibalizing his own family to maintain the illusion of success. Why are you telling me this, Arthur? I asked, turning back to him. You could go to the authorities right now. You could crush him yourself. Sterling smiled, a thin, predatory curve of the lips. Because crushing a man like Marcus Thorne is easy for me. It's business. But for you, Elena, it's justice. I've seen what you do with stone and soil. I want to see what you do when you're given the blueprints to a man's destruction. He leaned in closer. The merger dinner is in 3 weeks. Marcus thinks he's the coronation. He invited me because he needs my stamp of approval to finalize the deal. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants, until the very moment he loses everything. I looked at the folder in my hands. It contained every bank statement, every forged signature, every fraudulent transaction Marcus had ever made. I don't just want him to go to jail, I said, my voice steady and terrifyingly calm. I want him to see the world I built while he was busy destroying ours. I want him to know that the stinky sister he laughed at is the one who turned off the lights on his empire. Good, Sterling said, nodding toward my truck. Then we have work to do. I have the financial leverage, but you have the intimate knowledge of the Thorne family. We're going to coordinate with a friend of mine at the FBI, Agent Jerome Vance. Jerome is already looking into it for me, I said. Sterling raised an eyebrow, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. You're ahead of the game, Miss Thorne. I like that. But Jerome needs more than just suspicion. He needs a controlled environment where Marcus will be forced to admit the fraud in front of witnesses. The dinner, I said, at Carmichael's. Exactly, the restaurant you designed. There's a poetic irony in a man being arrested in a room designed by the person he spent a lifetime belittling. I handed the thermos back to him. "Thank you for the coffee, Arthur, and for the truth." "Don't thank me yet," he said, turning to walk back to his car. "Revenge is a heavy load to carry, Elena. It requires a foundation of steel. Make sure yours is ready." I stood alone on the pier for a long time after he left. I watched my crew moving boulders into place, building a seawall that would protect this land for a century. I thought about my father, sitting in his garden in Connecticut, believing his golden boy was taking care of him. I thought about my mother, so blinded by Marcus's expensive suits that she couldn't see the thief in her own house. I pulled out my phone and dialed my accountant. "Sarah, I need you to liquidate the reserve fund, all $5 million, and I need you to set up a blind trust under my father's name. We're going to buy back a house, Sarah, and then we're going to buy an empire. The Stinky sister was done ditching ditches. I was digging a pit so deep that when Marcus Thorne fell into it, he wouldn't even hear the echo." I looked out at the bronze plaque near the site entrance, Thorne and Tara. The name Thorne was about to be reclaimed, and Marcus was about to find out that in the world of architecture, the most dangerous part of a building isn't the roof, it's the ground that decides to swallow you whole.
I drove to Connecticut the following Sunday. I didn't take the Range Rover. I took my old beat-up Chevy Silverado, the truck that still had the smell of sawdust in the seats and a dent in the tailgate from a job site in Queens. I needed them to see exactly what they expected to see, the unsuccessful daughter coming home in a work truck. As I pulled into the driveway of the Thorne estate, the irony nearly choked me. To the world, this house was a symbol of old money stability. To me, knowing about the $200,000 lien and the empty bank accounts, it looked like a beautiful corpse. The garden, which I used to keep pristine, was starting to fail. The boxwoods were overgrown, and a patch of brown was spreading across the lawn. It was a perfect metaphor for the Thorne family, rotting from the roots up while trying to maintain the facade. My mother, Eleanor, met me at the door. She was wearing a cashmere twin set in pearls, her hair perfectly coiffed, but I noticed the subtle signs of stress, the way her eyes darted to the pile of unopened mail on the sideboard. "Elena," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and slight annoyance, "you should have called. Everything is a bit chaotic today. Your father isn't feeling well." "I just wanted to check in, Mom," I said, stepping past her. I saw the mail. Late notices from utility companies. A final warning from the property tax office. "How are things? Truly." She stiffened, adjusting her pearls. "Fine. Of course they're fine. Marcus is just rearranging some things. The economy is difficult right now, but he has everything under control. He's a professional, Elena, not like those little projects of yours." I felt a flash of pity, quickly replaced by steel. "Where's Dad?" I found him in the sunroom, staring out at the dying garden. Harold Thorne, the man who once ran crews of 50 men, looked small, shrunken. His eyes were cloudy, and he was wearing a sweater that was buttoned incorrectly. "Hey, Dad," I whispered, kneeling beside his chair. He looked at me, and for a second, a spark of recognition flared. "Elena? My little architect?" "Yes, Dad, it's me." I can't find the ledger, Elena," he said, his voice trembling. "Marcus said he took it to the office. He said he was going to make the numbers grow. But the bank called. They said I don't live here anymore? That can't be right, can it?" My heart shattered. He was in the early stages of cognitive decline, and Marcus was using his confusion as a playground for fraud. "Don't worry about the bank, Dad," I said, squeezing his hand. "I'm handling it, I promise." "Marcus is a good boy," he muttered, his mind drifting again. "Success story. Your mother says he's the one who counts." I stood up, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. I walked back into the hallway where my mother was pretending to organize the mail. "Mom, have you actually looked at these bills?" I asked, holding up a notice of default. She snatched it out of my hand, her face flushing crimson. "That is none of your business. Marcus told me those were mistakes, computer errors. He's handling the merger, Elena. Once that goes through, we'll have more money than we know what to do with. You just don't understand how high finance works." "I understand theft, Mom. I understand that Marcus is stealing from you."
"Don't you dare," she hissed, her eyes blazing with a terrifying cult-like loyalty to her golden boy. "You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of his brilliance. You're over here with your muddy boots and your manual labor, trying to bring down a man who is destined for greatness. Marcus is a thorn. You're just a disappointment." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that she wasn't just a victim, she was an enabler. She needed the fantasy of Marcus's success to justify her own existence. "Fine," I said, backing toward the door. "If you want to believe the lie, that's your choice. But remember this moment, Mom. Remember that I tried to warn you." I walked out to my truck, my hands shaking with a mixture of grief and fury. I sat in the driver's seat and dialed Jerome Vance at the FBI. "Jerome, it's Elena. I've seen the damage. It's not just securities fraud, it's elder abuse. He's gaslighting our father and draining his accounts while he can't defend himself." "I have the forensic accountants on it, Elena. We've tracked the money from your father's accounts to Marcus's personal crypto wallets. It's a clean trail, but we need to catch him in the act of finalizing the fraudulent merger documents. If he signs those papers at the dinner, he's finished, on both the federal and state levels." "He'll sign them," I said, looking back at the house. "He's too arrogant not to." "One more thing," Jerome added. "He's desperate. He's going to reach out to you soon. He's looking for a lifeline. Play along, Elena. Be the Stinky sister one last time." I hung up and started the engine. As I drove away, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Marcus, hey Elle, thinking about you. Look, I know I was a bit rough at the gala. Big brother stress, you know? Let's grab a drink soon. I actually have a business opportunity you might be interested in. Real money for once." I stared at the screen. The audacity was almost impressive. He had just stolen $500,000 from our father, and now he was coming for me. I typed back, my fingers steady. "Me. I'd love to, Marcus. I was actually hoping we could talk. I've had a good month, and I'm looking to invest some of my savings. Maybe you can help me?" The bait was set. Marcus replied almost instantly. "Marcus, that's my girl. I knew you'd come around. See you at the merger dinner at Carmichael's. I'll make sure you have a seat at the big table." I put the phone down and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of the disappointment my mother saw. Marcus Thorne thought he was inviting me to his coronation. He didn't realize he had just invited the executioner to dinner. And the best part, the dinner was at Carmichael's, a restaurant where I personally designed every hidden alcove and acoustic panel. I knew exactly where the FBI could hide their microphones. I knew exactly where the cameras would be. The Stinky sister was about to give a masterclass in high finance, and the price of tuition for Marcus was going to be his freedom.
If you want to destroy a man who thinks he's a giant, you don't attack his strength. You feed his ego until it becomes so heavy that he crushes himself. 3 days before the final dinner at Carmichael's, I met Marcus at a dimly lit, overpriced cigar bar in Midtown. This was his turf, a place where men in $4,000 suits traded rumors and pretended to be masters of the universe. Marcus was already at a corner table, a glass of 20-year-old Macallan in his hand, looking every bit the successful financier. But I saw the truth. I saw the way his fingers drummed a frantic, irregular beat on the mahogany table. I saw the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. He wasn't a titan. He was a man standing on a trap door, trying to convince the world it was a stage. "Elena, there she is," he called out, his voice booming with a forced heartiness. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my simple, off-the-rack coat. "God, I love your consistency." I sat down, placing my worn leather bag on the table with a sigh that sounded like exhaustion. "It's been a long day, Marcus. A pipe burst at a site in Brooklyn. I'm tired. I'm tired of the mud, the debt, and the constant struggle." Marcus's eyes lit up. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. A predator always smells the blood before it strikes. "I told you, didn't I?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The honest work scam is for people who don't have the brains to do anything else. But you're a thorn. You've got the DNA. You just needed a guide." "That's why I called," I said, looking down at my hands, playing the part of the defeated sister.
I've managed to save about $250,000 over the last 5 years. It's my entire life's work, Marcus. If I lose this, I have nothing. But I can't keep doing this lawn business. I want in on the merger. I want to be like you. I felt a surge of nausea as I said those words. $250,000 was what my company spent on fuel and equipment maintenance in a single month, but to Marcus, it was the lifeline he desperately needed to cover his immediate tracks before the audit. $250,000, Marcus repeated, his tongue practically darting out to lick his lips. It's a start, a small start, but because you're family, I can fold it into the Strategic Family Trust. It's a private vehicle I've set up for the inner circle. High returns, zero risk. I'm doing the same for Mom and Dad. Is that where Dad's money is? I asked, my voice trembling with a fake, naive hope. He said you were making the numbers grow. Exactly, Marcus smirked, his arrogance returning in full force. Dad's going to be a very wealthy man by the time I'm done. He doesn't even have to think about it. I've taken over all the boring stuff. His house title, his life insurance, his pension. I've consolidated it all into one powerhouse fund. It's brilliant, Elena, truly. My rage was a cold architectural thing, measured, load-bearing, and immovable. He had just admitted to cashing out our father's entire life to fund his own delusions, and he was proud of it. I brought the checkbook, Marcus, I said, pulling it from my bag, but I need to see the paperwork first. I might be a gardener, but I'm not stupid. I want to see the merger agreement. I want to know my money is safe. Marcus laughed, a sound of pure, condescending amusement. You want to see the merger docs? You wouldn't even understand the first page. It's all EBITDA, convertible debt, and equity swaps. It's high-level math, not planting petunias. Please, Marcus, just for my peace of mind, bring them to the dinner at Carmichael's. If I see the signatures from the partners, I'll sign the check right there. Consider it my entry fee into your world. Marcus paused. He was greedy, but he wasn't entirely a fool. He studied my face, looking for any sign of a trap, but all he saw was a tired, dirty woman who was desperate for a shortcut. Fine, he said, slapping the table. You want to feel important? I'll bring the docs. You can sign the check in front of Arthur Sterling himself. It'll be a great story for the family archives, the night the Stinky sister finally became a thorn. Thank you, Marcus, I whispered. You have no idea what this means to me. As I walked out of the bar, I felt the cold air hit my face, and I finally let the mask slip. My eyes turned to flint. I reached into my pocket and turned off the recording device that Jerome Vance had fitted into my coat lining. I didn't go home. I drove to a park overlooking the East River and waited. 10 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up beside my truck. Agent Jerome Vance stepped out, holding a tablet. Did you get it? I asked. Clear as a bell. He showed me the audio levels. He admitted to cashing out your father's assets. He admitted to the family trust, which we've already identified as a slush fund. And, most importantly, he promised to bring the forged merger documents to the dinner. Is it enough? Combined with the evidence Arthur Sterling provided and the forensic audit of your brother's offshore accounts, it's a slam dunk. We're not just looking at fraud, we're looking at racketeering. But we need him to present those documents to the investors at the dinner. That's the act of intent that seals his fate. He'll do it, I said, looking at the city lights. He thinks he's won. He thinks he's finally managed to use me for something other than a punchline. You okay, Elena? Jerome asked softly. This is your brother. Once we move in, there's no going back. My brother died a long time ago, Jerome, I said, my voice as steady as a concrete pillar. The man in that bar is just a parasite wearing his face. He's been eroding my father's life for years. It's time for the erosion to stop. I drove back to my office and spent the rest of the night looking over the final plans for the Hudson River front. I looked at the seawall, the massive hidden structure designed to withstand the most violent storms. People only see the beautiful park on top. They don't see the steel pilings driven deep into the bedrock. They don't see the engineering that keeps the land from being swallowed by the tide. I am that seawall.
Marcus Thorne thought he was the storm. He thought he could wash me away with his insults and his arrogance. He didn't realize that I had spent my entire life learning how to hold the ground. I picked up a pen and signed a document for my own firm, a $4.2 million equipment purchase order. I didn't need Marcus's high finance. I had built an empire with my hands, and I was about to use that empire to level his. "See you at dinner, Marcus," I whispered to the empty room. "I hope you're hungry, because you're about to eat every word you've ever said to me."
There's a term in structural engineering called progressive collapse. It's what happens when one critical support beam fails, shifting the weight to others that weren't designed to carry it, causing a domino effect of destruction until the entire building is nothing but a memory of dust. 24 hours before the dinner at Carmichael's, Marcus Thorne hit his breaking point. I was standing in my penthouse, watching the rain wash over the glass of my floor-to-ceiling windows when my phone rang at 11:47 p.m. I didn't even need to look at the screen. I knew the vibration of desperation when I felt it. "Elena?" Marcus rasped the moment I picked up. He didn't say hello. He didn't lead with an insult. He sounded like a man who had spent the last 6 hours screaming into a pillow. "I need you to listen to me, very carefully." "Marcus, it's nearly midnight. What's going on?" I kept my voice soft, laced with a calculated touch of concern. "The merger. There's a temporary liquidity issue," he said, his words tripping over each other. I could hear the clinking of ice against a glass, likely his 4th or 5th scotch. "Arthur Sterling's people are asking for a verification of immediate capital. It's a formality, Elena, purely a formality. But my main accounts they're tied up in a high-yield transition." I leaned against the cold marble of my kitchen island, a grim smile reflected in the dark window. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I need $100,000, he blurted out. The number was twice what he had asked for in our previous meeting. "Now, tonight. I know you said you had $250 saved. I need $100 of it wired to the Strategic Family Trust immediately. I'll pay you back triple once the papers are signed tomorrow night. I swear on our father's name." The audacity of that last sentence made my blood run cold. He was swearing on the name of the man he had already robbed him of his home. $100,000, Marcus? I let out a long, shaky breath. Performance art at its finest. That's almost half of everything I've ever made. I was going to use that to buy new equipment for the Brooklyn project. "Forget the damn equipment," Marcus shouted into the phone, his golden boy mask finally shattering. "You're playing with pebbles, Elena. I'm moving mountains. Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what happens to this family if I don't close this deal? We go back to being nothing. We go back to being the children of a common electrician." I closed my eyes. The common electrician he was so ashamed of was the man who had worked 12-hour shifts in freezing basements to pay for Marcus's private schools. "I don't know, Marcus," I whispered. "It's so much money. What if something goes wrong?" "Nothing is going to go wrong," he screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and terror. "I am Marcus Thorne. People beg to invest with me. I'm doing you a favor, you ungrateful little brat. Give me the money, or don't ever call yourself a Thorne again." The silence on the line stretched for 10 long seconds. I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing. I could almost smell the fear radiating through the signal. "Fine," I said, making my voice sound defeated. "I'll do it, but I can't wire it tonight. The bank has a fraud flag on my account for large transfers. I'll bring a certified cashier's check to the dinner tomorrow. I'll hand it to you the moment I see Arthur Sterling's signature on that merger." There was a pause, then a long, shaky exhale of relief from Marcus. "Thank you. God, Elena, I knew you'd understand. This is for all of us, for the family. I'll make you a queen, I promise." "I don't want to be a queen, Marcus. I just want everyone to get exactly what they deserve." "Exactly," he chuckled, his arrogance flooding back now that he thought he'd secured his lifeline.
See you at Carmichael's. Don't be late, and for the love of God, wear something that doesn't smell like a greenhouse." He hung up. I set the phone down on the counter and looked at my hands. They were steady, perfectly steady. I picked up my secure line and called Agent Jerome Vance. He took the bait, $100,000. He's expecting a check at the dinner. He's completely unhinged, Jerome. He's not even trying to hide the desperation anymore. "We're ready, Elena," Jerome said. "The restaurant is wired. I have agents positioned in the kitchen and at the valet station. Arthur Sterling is fully briefed. The moment Marcus presents those fraudulent documents to the investors and accepts your investment check, we have everything we need for a RICO indictment." "Good," I said, "because I'm tired of this story. I'm ready for the ending." I spent the rest of the night in my home office, the war room. I looked at the photos of my father's house, the house I had already secretly bought back from the bank through a shell company 2 days ago. I looked at the trust fund I had established to ensure my mother would never have to worry about a bill again, even if she never spoke to me after tomorrow. Marcus Thorne thought he was a predator. He thought he was the wolf at the door. He didn't realize that in the world of architecture, the most dangerous person isn't the one who builds the house, it's the one who knows how to take it down without leaving a trace. I looked at the navy blue dress hanging on my door. It was elegant, understated, and powerful. It was the dress of a CEO, not a stinky sister. Tomorrow night, the manual laborer was going to host a masterclass in demolition. Tomorrow night, the name Thorne would be cleansed. I sat back in my chair and watched the first light of dawn touch the Manhattan skyline. The storm was coming, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving it, I was the one who had designed the lightning. "Revenge," I whispered to the rising sun, "is best served at a table I built myself."
Carmichael's was more than just a 5-star restaurant. It was a masterpiece of acoustic engineering and aesthetic restraint, and I knew that because I was the one who designed it. I had spent 3 months ensuring that every hidden microphone for the house system was perfectly placed and that the private dining room was soundproofed against everything except the truth. As I walked in, wearing my navy silk dress and heels that felt like weapons, the air smelled of truffle oil and impending doom. Marcus was already at the head of the long mahogany table, surrounded by his peers. There was Richard and Sandra, the 2 polished executives from the merger firm, Isabella, looking like a trophy dipped in diamonds, and Caleb, still adjusting that tragic hair transplant. And then there was Arthur Sterling, sitting to Marcus's right like a silent judge from an ancient era. "Elena, you're late," Marcus barked, though his eyes immediately darted to my hands, searching for the check. He looked terrible. His skin was a sallow gray under the expensive lighting, his tie slightly crooked. "Sit down. We were just about to celebrate the future." "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Marcus," I said, taking my seat directly across from Arthur. We exchanged a look that lasted only a second, but it contained a decade of planning. Marcus stood up, clinking his crystal glass. The room went silent. "Tonight," Marcus began, his voice shaky but gaining strength as he fed on his own delusions, "we finalize a partnership that will redefine private equity. I've built Thorne Capital from the ground up with a mind for the future and a respect for the hustle. I'm surrounded by titans tonight." He looked at me with a smirk that was meant to be a killing blow. "And then there's my sister, Elena, the manual laborer, the girl who plays with dirt. But even she has finally seen the light. Tonight, she's handing over her life savings to be a part of my vision. It's a touching moment of family unity, really." Polite, condescending laughter rippled through the room. Caleb snickered. Isabella adjusted her pearls with a smirk of pure pity. "The documents, Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through the laughter like a diamond through glass. "You promised to show me the signed merger before I handed over the capital." Marcus's face tightened. He pulled a thick, leather-bound folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "Here, signed by Richard and Sandra, validated by the board. Now the check, Elena. Don't be difficult." I didn't open the folder. I didn't need to.
Instead, I looked at Arthur Sterling. "Arthur, is it time?" The room went ice cold. Marcus frowned, his eyes darting between us. "What? Time for what?" Arthur Sterling stood up slowly, the sheer weight of his presence making Marcus look like a child in a suit too big for him. He pulled an identical folder from his own briefcase and laid it on the table. "Marcus," Arthur said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble, "I've spent 40 years in this city. I know a real deal when I see one, and I know a corpse when I smell it. This folder contains the actual audit of your firm, the one that shows a 34% deficit, the one that proves you've been moving funds from your father's retirement account to cover your margin calls." The silence that followed was absolute. It felt physical. What are you talking about?" Marcus stammered, his face turning a ghostly white. "Richard, tell him, we're solid." Richard, the executive Marcus thought was his partner, wouldn't even look him in the eye. "The merger is dead, Marcus. Arthur showed us the books 2 hours ago. We're only here as witnesses." You betrayed me," Marcus screamed, turning on me. "You stinky little bitch, you did this." "No, Marcus," I said, standing up. I pulled the $100,000 cashier's check from my bag and ripped it into 4 slow, deliberate pieces. The kennefe fell onto the table like snow. "You did this when you stole $340,000 from our father. You did this when you took out a loan against the house he spent 40 years building. You did this when you laughed at me while you were cannibalizing our family." "I am the success story," Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking. "I am the one that matters. You're just a gardener." "I am the CEO of Thorne and Terra. I own a $12 million company. I have 47 employees. I just signed the riverfront contract for $6 million. And the building we're sitting in, the one you're about to be arrested in, I designed it, I built it, I own the ground you're standing on, Marcus." The doors to the private room swung open. Jerome Vance stepped in, followed by 4 men in dark suits with FBI emblazoned on their backs. "Marcus Thorne," Jerome said, his voice echoing in the acoustic perfection of the room, "you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and felony elder financial abuse. You have the right to remain silent." Isabella screamed, dropping her glass. Caleb tried to slide out of his chair and disappear, but a second agent blocked his path. "Caleb Vance," the agent said, "we have some questions regarding Vance Acquisitions and its role in the Strategic Family Trust." Marcus was being hauled out of his chair, his golden boy mask completely shattered. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked like the thief he had always been. "Elena, help me," he cried as they snapped the cuffs on his wrists. "Talk to them. We're family. Mom will hate you for this. Think of Mom." "I am thinking of Mom," I said, watching him being led toward the door. "I'm thinking about how she's going to live in the house I just bought back for her. I'm thinking about how Dad is going to have the medical care he needs because I'm paying for it. You aren't family, Marcus. You're a parasite, and I've finally finished the demolition." As they led him through the restaurant, past the elite of New York, everyone watched in horrified silence. The titan of finance was being walked out of his party in chains. I sat back down. My heart was pounding, but my soul was at peace. My mother, Eleanor, was sitting at the far end of the table, her face a mask of shock and dawning horror. She looked at me, her eyes finally seeing the woman I was, not the disappointment she had created. "Elena, all that money, the company, why didn't you tell us?" "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, Mom, but you only ever loved the person Marcus pretended to be. I didn't hide my success. You just refused to see anything that was covered in gold." I stood up and looked at Arthur Sterling. He raised his glass to me, a silent, respectful salute. "I'm going to go see Dad," I said. I walked out of Carmichael's, past the flashing lights of the police cars, and into the cool Manhattan night. The Stinky sister had won, but as I looked up at the buildings I helped build, I realized it wasn't about the win. It was about the foundation. I had cleared away the rot. Now, finally, I could start to build something that would actually last. 1 month later, I stood on the edge of the Hudson Riverfront project at 5:30 a.m. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the steel and glass of Manhattan in shades of bruised purple and gold. The air smelled of fresh river water and wet concrete. The seawall, the one that Marcus and his friends never even knew existed, was finished. It sat deep beneath the surface, silent and immovable, holding the weight of the city against the tide. My boots were covered in mud. My hands were calloused, and for the first time in 34 years, I felt completely, utterly clean. The fall of Marcus Thorne had been swifter than any demolition I'd ever managed. He was currently awaiting trial in a federal detention center, facing 15 to 20 years for a litany of charges that included racketeering and elder abuse. Without his golden boy mask, his lawyers couldn't even find a foundation to build a defense. Isabella had filed for divorce exactly 48 hours after the arrest. I heard she was already trying to sell her story to a tabloid, but the public had no appetite for the wife of a man who robbed his own father. Caleb Mance's firm was under a separate investigation. He was currently on sabbatical, which in New York means he's hiding in a house his name isn't on, waiting for the subpoenas to stop. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was sitting on the porch of the house in Connecticut 2 weeks ago. I'd paid off the fraudulent lien and transferred the title into a protected trust that Marcus can never touch, even if he ever gets out. My mother, Eleanor, sat across from me, sipping tea. She looked older. The pearls were gone, replaced by a simple sweater. For the first time in my life, she didn't look through me, she looked at me. "I went to see him," she whispered, referring to Marcus. "He asked for money. He didn't ask how your father was. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just asked for a better lawyer." She looked out at the garden, the one that I had spent the last 3 weekends restoring with my own hands. I spent 30 years building a pedestal for a man who was made of glass, and I spent those same 30 years trying to hide the daughter who was made of iron. "I don't need an apology, Mom," I said, and I meant it. "I just need you to see the world as it is, not as Marcus sold it to you." She nodded slowly. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Years of neglect don't vanish overnight, but it was a beginning, a new foundation. My father, Harold, was in the garden, puttering around the tomato plants. He didn't fully understand the legal drama. He didn't know his son was in a cell. All he knew was that his little architect was home. The bills were paid, and the soil was rich. He called me over to show me a new sprout. "Look at that, Elena," he beamed, his eyes clear for a fleeting moment. "You give them the right ground and they'll grow through anything." "You taught me that, Dad," I said, hugging him. Back at the riverfront site, my foreman, Silas, walked up beside me, handing me a fresh roll of blueprints. "We're ready for the final phase, boss, the floating gardens. This is going to be the jewel of the city." "Let's get to work, Silas," I said. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a manual laborer. They were the hands of a millionaire. They were the hands of a woman who had been underestimated, mocked, and betrayed, and used every one of those stones to build an empire. Success isn't the designer suit you wear to a gala. It isn't the merger you sign with a stolen pen. It isn't the number of people you can look down on from a penthouse you don't own. Success is the foundation. It's the work you do when no one is watching. It's the integrity to build something that lasts longer than a news cycle. It's the courage to be the stinky sister in the mud because you know that that's where the strength is. Marcus Thorne lived for the reflection in the mirror. I lived for the integrity of the stone. In the end, the mirror shattered, but the stone remained. As the city roared to life around me, I answered my phone. A new client, a National Park Service, wanting to discuss a project in the Rockies. I smiled, feeling the sun warm my face. "This is Elena Thorne. Tell me about your ground." Message from Revenge Stories 101. To everyone watching, remember this: never mistake silence for weakness, and never mistake a uniform of labor for a lack of ambition. The people who mock your manual work or your small beginnings are often the ones standing on sand. They need to pull you down to feel high. But like Elena Thorne, if you focus on your craft, protect your integrity, and build your foundation deep into the bedrock, no storm and no brother can ever take you down. Value isn't what you carry in your pocket, it's what you build with your soul.
Thank you for joining us for this journey on Revenge Stories 101. If you found value in Elena's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And always remember, the best revenge isn't a shout. It's the silent, unstoppable growth of your own empire. Until next time, keep building.